clean, sanitize.
Yes, I have my little hanging one here.
ไม่ว่าน้ำสดนะ
See them?
Good afternoon.
confidence, pray to God, Heavenly Father, the giver of life, that He will hasten us to perfection in the company of the saints. The Lord be with you. Also with you. Let us pray. O God of grace and glory, we remember before you this day our sister Thelma, Christobel Thelma. We thank you for giving her as a family friend to know and love as a companion and as a pilgrimage. With your boundless compassion, console us more. Give us the faith to see death, the gate of eternal life, so that in quiet confidence we may continue our course till by your call we are reunited with those who have gone before. In Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Jesus said, I am the resurrection, I am the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His compassion never fades. Every morning they are renewed. Jesus said, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. I am sure that neither death nor life, nor danger, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation,
A personal tribute. Auntie Thelma, a giant woman. Every family has their giants, the people who shape the world, who make things happen or not, the people who influence through their words and actions. And Auntie Thelma was definitely one of ours. The things she did or did not do, the decisions she made have influenced so many of us. It's a strange feeling when someone you care for dies. You think about your memories, your time with them. You think about the influence they had on you. For someone who lived 5,000 miles away, Auntie Thelma had a big influence on me, my life, and how I see the world. I'm not the only one, I know that. If we start right back at the beginning, my granny, Gwendolyn Constant, was her aunt. My mum grew up in and around Auntie Thelma, and without doubt there was a special bond between Aunt Thelma and my mum, Betty Ryan, or Betty Hill. My mum does, and always did, love her Auntie Thelma. As a young girl, my mum would stay with Auntie and would look after Rosalie and Shirley. And when Aunt Thelma brought Shirley and Rosie to England, we stayed together. And there I have some of my earliest memories of Aunt Thelma. She believed in being proper. She believed in behaving well, speaking well. She believed in hard work. Boy, did she work hard. Lesson number 1 I learned when I first came to Antigua: don't tell anyone your business. Lesson number 2, you always fix your hair and your face before you walk out of your house. You never ever tell anyone your age, ever. I once made the mistake of asking, because I was travelling with Auntie, if I could look at her passport. All I wanted to do was look at the picture, but she point blank refused to let me have it. When I asked why, she said, "You're not going to know my age." She never, ever wasted anything. Money, food, no matter how small, she did not waste things. I remember thinking how beautiful and glamorous she was. I remember thinking how powerful and clever she was. She always wore high heels and beautiful hats to church. She could speak for herself, and she did. She always had an opinion, and she was not afraid to share it. She was charming and gracious and generous, if she approved of you. Equally, she was dismissing if she didn't. She had a strong community spirit, and she was a family. When I first came to Antigua aged 13, I stayed with Auntie. This was a woman who looked glamorous and refined at a premier's cocktail party, and then the next day she took me to go mix the beds and repair a veranda wall down the Saturday. I came to many summers after that and always stayed with Rosalie and Auntie. And there are 3 stories that sum up Auntie Thelma in my mind. When I was 16, she took me to her dressmaker and made a beautiful dress for me to fly back to England in. And when she took me to the airport, I hugged her and I thanked her. And she whispered in my ear, "Always look your best when you're traveling. You never know who you might meet." When I was 19, Auntie Heather came down from New York for Carnival, and she gave me a very crisp $100 bill. I was so excited. I ran straight next door to the shop that was right beside Auntie in Church Street, and I bought a swimming costume for $110. This was the days when $110 was a lot of money. I came back to Aunt Thelma's and I slipped the costume on, showed her, and she agreed it looked great, and it suited me. And then she asked me, how much did it cost? I told her. She hit the roof. She insisted I take it back. It was too expensive. It was stupidness to spend all that money on one swimming costume. Feeling brave and grown up at the time, my reply was, "No, Auntie, I like it, and it's not too expensive for me." What she didn't ever count on, even at that stage, was that I was almost as stubborn as her. Every time I wore that costume, she would shake her head, and she'd tell me that I had no sense. This was the first of many things we didn't agree on. Whenever I came to Antigua, I used to stay with Auntie in Church Street until I was age 40, married and a mother. And then I decided that I wanted to stay in a hotel. You can imagine the conversation. What happened? The old house not good enough for you anymore? And then I got the lecture on wasting my money. And I had that lecture every time for 15 years that followed. In my heart, I know she was trying to protect me from spending my money unnecessarily. Without Auntie, I would not know the Antiguan woman inside me. And for that, I will always be grateful. If we are lucky in life, we get to know and love people who love us and who shape us. People who help us decide who we are, what we do, and what we don't believe in. For me, Auntie Thelma was one of those people. A giant of a woman. Thank you, Auntie, and thank you for kneeling down from time to time so that I could step up.
In fact, the first call I would ever
I always got that treat. One day, I was bold enough to say, Connie Thelma, please don't put out yourself in me like this. And she would say, this is a child. I do what I want to do. And I'm glad that she did. I would always enjoy our visits because we could certainly catch up on what was happening in as the world turns, the bold and the beautiful, and the young and the restless. I always try to figure out how many times did Nikki marry Victor. But God will always unravel that mystery for me. I cherish the memory of Godmother so dearly, and I learned many lessons from her. And this is one. At our home, we were having a tea party, and I was busy trying to ensure that the table was properly set, that the sandwiches were put in the right place, and of course, that the water had boiled. Godmother was not too pleased. The next day, she called me, and she said, Debbie, I'm not happy. I said, why, Godmother? I made sure that everyone was attended to. She said, you looked about the external factors, but you did not sit down to make sure that you took care of the feelings of your guests. That was a wake-up call for me. A light bulb went off, and it reinforced for me what Godmother stood for. That is, always making people feel special. And so, as I close, I will go back to the question I asked at the beginning. How could we have been so bold-faced? How could we have been so bold? And I'll tell you why. We were bold-faced and we were bold because Goddy Thelma understood that as children, we wanted to be happy. And if watching television at her house made us happy, then that made us feel special. It meant as well that when I went to her home and she put on this lavish meal for me, it wasn't a case of her putting out herself for me, but for her, she wanted me to feel special. And lastly, she taught me that it is not about the trappings of life. It is not about getting things right so that other people could say you got it right. It is about making people feel special. And so, Godmother, I'm sure you are adjusting your angel wings as you prop up the cushions in the great hall above. And I want to say, on behalf of my siblings and on my own behalf, that you made us feel special. Thank you, Godmother. I love you.
Thank you both for your tributes. And now we'll have the eulogy by Laurent Gifts, nephew.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to, at this point, acknowledge the presence of the former Governor General, Louis Lake Tank. And again, welcome to all. I am Lauren Jilks. And as far as I'm aware, I am the oldest nephew of Mrs. Christobel Thelma Camacho. But I must confess something. I never knew that she was Christobel. And I'm sure that most of you here never heard that name attached to her either. But it is so. I will say too also that thank you all for assembling with us, her family, at St. Andrew's to celebrate her life. As we knew her, Mrs. Thelma Camacho, Auntie Thelma, Mommy in connection with Rosalie, her daughter, Thelma to her close friends and her remaining siblings, Lawrence, Heather, who is in the USA, Pam, who is here, and Rodwell in the USA. I've been asked to read this eulogy on behalf of her brother, St. Lawrence de Freitas, and our entire family. Christobel Thelma Camacho was born on the 19th November 1921. She departed this life on the 25th of May 2022. It was just over 6 months ago that we celebrated with her on her 100th birthday. This was a wonderful occasion, for she was quite alert and could enjoy and take part in the celebrations with her family members and some of her many friends at her home in Church Street and abroad on the Zoom platform. Sadly, over the years, several of her family, close relatives, and their friends and associates have preceded her to the great beyond. We are so grateful that she reached the milestone of age 100. I hope all of us here reaches that age. It's possible. Nothing is impossible with God. This was a wonderful occasion, for she was quite alert, as I said, and we can say, sadly, over the years, several of her family, they passed. Her relatives present here today include her brother St. Lawrence de Freitas, her sister Pam Beluga, and several of her nieces and nephews and cousins. Additionally, we acknowledge the presence of many other family and friends who are viewing the live stream of this service via YouTube online. She was related to the Buckleys and the Strattons of Antigua, many of whom now live all over the world and are participating in this service remotely. In that regard, we particularly want to acknowledge the presence via live stream online of her sister Heather Reed and her brother-in-law Edward Reed in Florida, who so wanted to be here but could not travel due to ill health. Also, watching online is her brother Bishop Rodwell Buckley in Washington, D.C., and many others. We are so glad to share this service with you. Thelma was born in St. John's, Antigua, to Gladys Stratton. She was the second of Gladys's 6 children, including her sister Ada May, who was my mom, my sister Genevieve, Heather and Clarice, and her brothers Lindbergh, known as Lindy, and she has one of his daughters here with us this afternoon. St. Lawrence and St. Lawrence, that is de Freitas. She grew up in Tanner Street at Otter's area of St. John's and attended what was then the Antigua Girls' School. From an early age, Thelma demonstrated a strong commitment to her family and was often the mover and shaker who made the tough decisions and got things done. She was forced to grow up perhaps faster than most when her mother died at a time when Thelma was still in her mid-20s. Upon her mother's untimely passing, Thelma found herself, along with her older sister Ada, responsible for their younger siblings, who were then ranging in age from 9 to 14 years. We can only imagine that many challenges she would have encountered as a young mother herself in suddenly becoming a primary caregiver to her younger brothers and sisters, and how those that Thelma quickly decided to take him to live with her and treated him as if he was her own son. In fact, to this day, Rosalie still calls Lawrence brother, even though he is really her uncle. And many people often mistook Thelma for his mother in the early days. He grew up together with Rosalie and Shirley, just as any siblings would, and continued living with Thelma until he married his wife, Catherine. Lawrence often reminds us that he will always be grateful for the kindness and love Thelma showed to him. He describes her as not only his sister, but also his friend, and will never forget the words of advice and lessons she often helped him to become the person he is today. In her early 20s, she met and married Aubrey Camacho, with whom she had 2 children, Rosalie and Shirley. Unfortunately, the youngest daughter, Shirley, died in her early teens. Shirley's passing at such an early age left a long-lasting and devastating impact upon Thelma and Rosalie, and changed the trajectory of the entire family, of her entire family's life. Even when years later it was difficult for Thelma to talk about Shirley, though she always kept her photo in a place of pride in her home. She was also a devoted mother to Rosalie, with whom she maintained a special bond throughout her life. In her younger days, she and her husband Aubrey operated one of Antigua's early grocery stores, Esperanza. And this was situated at the corner of High and Thames Streets, where the branch of the bank ECAB is presently located. But her professional life was mostly focused on managing her real estate properties, a task which she took very seriously and managed fastidiously. Believed was right. We are blessed